and explain every step as we take it going forward throughout the program.
Él es Pedro, mi papá, un hombre de los meros meros. No conoce la palabra miedo. Nada lo detiene. Y además de todo es muy fuerte, pero ahora es más fuerte porque ya se vacunó.
La vacuna contra el COVID-19 es completamente gratis y puedes obtenerla en cualquier sede de Denver Health. Para mayor información visita denverhealth.org/vacúnate o llama al 720-728-1294.
Welcome to the Safety, Housing, Education, and Homelessness Committee of Denver City Council. The Safety, Housing, Education, and Homelessness Committee begins now.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, May the 4th. This is the Denver City Council Safety Committee. My name is Paul Cashman. I represent South Denver District 6. Have the pleasure of chairing this committee. And before we get into introductions, in the spirit of Councilmember Herndon, who's not with us this morning, and former Councilman Paul Lopez, our current clerk and recorder, I would be remiss if I didn't start by saying, May the 4th be with you. So this is the Safety Committee, but we also handle issues related to health, housing, education, and homelessness. Today's focus is on housing. We'll start by having my colleagues introduce, starting from the right side of the
Was
dais.
it something I said? I'm all lonely over here. Amanda Sawyer, District 5.
Good morning.
Good morning. Kevin Flynn, Southwest Denver, District 2.
Deborah Ortega, City Council at Large.
Robin Kniech at large.
Good morning, all. I believe we also have council members Sid Ibaka and Council President Gilmore online if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Stacy Gilmore, District 11.
All right, well, we'll wait for Councilmember Sid Ibaka in a little bit. I'm going to turn the duties of introduction over to Councilmember Ortega.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if you recall, the last time we had a presentation to City Council from some out-of-town guests that talked to us about transportation, the Lattice Group was anticipated to be part of that presentation, but unfortunately was not able to get out of the UK. And I understand you brought your weather with you, right? Yeah, we need the moisture. We absolutely need the moisture. So I want to just acknowledge the important role that Ian Chowdhury has played, not only in bringing folks to talk to Denver City Council, but to other groups throughout the metro area about the importance of looking at transportation and how we do housing differently so that it is challenging our thinking and our actions around how we can do things differently, because whatever we do today will be in place for decades into the future. And this is an opportunity to hear from an innovative housing developer from the UK, and I will let Ian introduce him. So Ian, thank you for your important role that you're playing for our communities.
Thank you for your comments. I really appreciate it. So like we said last time when we met with the other European firms who came here, that we'll continue to look for other innovative firms who are doing something different than just focusing on transportation. Lattice Group is led by and founded by Robert, and Robert Luck is here with us today. Robert and I know each other for many years. Generally, we used to meet in UK, and I'm very happy that he made it to Denver this time. And he's going to spend a week here. So we're going to meet with a lot of people that Robert is interested in meeting with to see what are the opportunities for him to set up manufacturing in the US. I will introduce Robert's background a little bit, and then I will hand it to him to talk about his firm and his business. He is the co-founder and chief executive of Lattice Group, which is a master developer. And they have worked on low carbon or even zero emissions housing projects in a very innovative way. It's a home building manufacturing approach that is different than what we have seen so far in the US. So it's not like the way we think about manufactured houses. It's a different way of building these houses in a factory and then deploying them on site with a very short amount of time. We are talking days, or maybe hours to build and days to deliver. And he's going to talk more about that. It's all based on technology that he worked on and invented years ago. And he has been deploying that in the UK, leveraging that technology-driven platform to create places. Lattice is on a mission, the way he describes it, to make sustainability, beauty, and connected living accessible to everyone. There are a lot of considerations there about the standards, permitting approaches, zoning, all that goes with it, that he has done all that work in UK. And he's going to share that, how we can benefit from the experience that in London or south of London, that some of the projects that he has already implemented. Robert studied architecture at the University of Nottingham and the Architectural Association. Prior to that, he worked at the Richard Rogers Partnership. With that, without further ado, I would like Robert to come and talk about his innovative housing.
Thank you very much, Ian. Well, thank you for the invite to be here. Today I'm going to share with you my sort of journey into...
Can you pull that mic down closer? Because the sound in here is a little challenging, so thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, thank you, Robert.
Yeah. So I'm going to share with you today my journey into modern methods of construction and how the way in which I built my company, primarily from originally an architectural practice building projects for other people, into a business that manufactured its own homes, and now as a master developer using other people's manufacturing facilities to produce new places. And it's really interesting. When I started looking at the dynamics of the market here in Colorado, following Ian's suggestion, it's incredible how similar the challenges are that we have in the UK. The housing output is far below the requirement for housing and the demand for housing. And that's caused over many years an exponential price increase and essentially pricing people out of becoming either a homeowner or even a home renter. And that's a real challenge both socially and economically. In every country that we see now is that there's a huge mismatch between population growth and the desire for a home and what the traditional home building market can deliver. And so really Lattice is all about how can we leverage these new technologies to help resolve the output problem of the market. Now, I'm not sure what the fundamental issues here are in terms of housing output, but in the UK, the main home builders, the large corporate home builders, there's a debate whether they actually want to deliver more homes in any case, because actually by limiting the supply of new homes, you maintain the price point of the product. And when you're sitting on very large land banks, actually it can cause the land bank price to continuously go up. So in many ways, the fundamental issue that I found was that the home building business, in the UK at least, was a land business and not really a home building one. So I wanted to flip that around and say, how could we look at home building in a different way, almost like delivering products or cars to a consumer. So again, like the UK, there's a historic opportunity. This mismatch between supply and demand actually is a huge opportunity to deliver on the housing crisis, deliver needed infrastructure, revolutionize the way in which we build homes, and significantly change the way in which we achieve home ownership. And I'll touch on each of those issues separately. The key priorities for my business are how can we deliver more affordable homes that are actually beautiful? And actually reading the description of the development of Denver since 1914, it's quite interesting that beauty was at the heart of that. And I have a particular interest in how can you make affordable but also beautiful new places? How can you increase access to home ownership, delivering the infrastructure? We use a phrase in the UK called leveling up. How can you use this opportunity both to create a new industry? How can you spark off the new way of building homes and develop new skills, new facilities, create long-term, highly valuable jobs? How can you drive productivity through technology, through digital innovation? And how can you drive towards net zero, all in this single opportunity? And so my journey as a developer really started out in 2006, where we created a company original company called Lattice Homes, which really at its time was quite a niche. It was focused on how could we create nice-looking, affordable, very low operating cost homes that people wanted to buy. And actually at that time, it was quite a niche. People weren't really focused on affordability and sustainability at the same time. And so this picture is one of my first developments built in modern methods of construction. And it was incredibly, incredibly popular. People, and actually walking around the product, you could not tell it was a precision manufactured home. But this really started the journey for me in modern methods of construction. Now these homes were designed essentially as a flat pack system. So panels that were put together in a factory with the electrics, the plumbing, all in them, and then assembled on site to produce the 2, 3, and 4 bedroom homes that we were creating. And it meant, for us, it meant a degree of standardization. You could replicate the process and speed up the production of a home. It also meant the quality of the home, that we have issues with labor and resources, in terms of building resources in the UK, and that helped resolve some of those issues for me, starting out as a home builder. But really, it was just the very beginning of the opportunity, because in my mind, this development sold out in one weekend, and the feedback from the consumer was such that actually, where can you build more of them? But we couldn't build more faster, so I needed to look at how could we take this kind of idea of panels produced in a factory and take it one step further into how might you produce this house more like a car facility. And so, I mean, the product, just to sort of look at the product itself, there is no difference in terms of appearance or technical specification, or the only thing you notice is the finishing internally is probably better than you find in a traditionally built home on site. And so I set out and I co-founded a company called Top Hat, which was a facility we built in the Midlands in England. And it was designed essentially to produce a home in a controlled factory environment where you could control waste, you could have different labor stations on the site doing electrics, plumbing, etc. So you do all the processes in the factory, essentially creating a product at around 90% manufactured value. So you do 90% of the work in the factory, the remaining 10% on site. And so this is to give you some pictures of what it looks like on the inside, essentially, and many companies are now in the UK doing this same sort of process. Essentially, you create the panels, like I saw a company yesterday which also does panel production. You do the electrics, the plumbing, the everything, wiring inside the house. It has a production line that's moving at a certain pace, so it means that certain tasks get done on time. It also means you have full accountability of the product itself. Now, one of the issues we have in the UK, primarily for new homes, is a understanding of the underlying asset quality, because when you build a home in a field, in the mud and the rain, you don't necessarily know how good quality that construction is for the home itself. So there's lots of issues, and if you Google it, you'll see that a lot of the major home builders have issues with snagging. And to me, it was crazy to think that actually when you buy a car, it works and it's perfect in every way when you get it home. When you buy a new home, at least in the UK, you almost expect there to be problems with it. And that's just a crazy sort of situation in my mind for what is essentially a very, very expensive consumer product. And so just to give you sort of how that sort of looks in a factory, and again, there are other people building homes like this now. Essentially, you put the walls together in an assembly station. You have various different trades happening on site, again, moving at a constant pace. You know the takt time, how many homes you can produce in a given time frame. And essentially, this was producing, at the time, a development we were building in a place called Chatham in Kent, in England, for 300 homes. And the interesting thing is that when you build traditionally, typically when you build at large scale, you put pressure on labor forces and material requirements for a specific site, and that can cause, at scale, price inflation. It can cost you more to build more traditionally on site. Whereas in a factory, the more that you build, the more volume, the more output you have in a factory, the lower the price point of the house. It's a double win in many ways. Not only is the product better in terms of the quality of finish, specification, the underlying understanding of the asset itself, but also the rate at which you can build the homes on site in a much quicker way. And then in terms of looking at how you might maintain and look after those homes, it gives you information about the product which you'd never get with a traditional home. And so essentially, the homes that were built using this methodology, and again, there's a company called L&G in the UK, a company called Ilka now doing this methodology of home production. And essentially, you can build a home as quickly as you want to build it. In fact, the factory production itself is hours rather than days and weeks. And the production, the assembly on site is days again. So it's a very, very quick process. Just to give you some sort of background how that works, essentially, the groundworks, the foundations are constructed whilst the modules are being produced in the facility. Then they get shipped to site in a complete format. So the facade is on, the kitchens are installed, the carpets are in, the lights are in. It's gone through all of its building regulations or code in the facility itself. And then essentially, those boxes get placed on top of each other. And you'll see on the image there, sort of soldier course, that essentially is where the module joins the next module on the house. And so it's an incredibly efficient process. But it also changes the dynamic slightly, because when you design something for manufacture, you start to think about it as a true consumer product. So you think about, okay, what's the space requirements for the product, the target audience? What's the efficiency standards I want to achieve? The robustness? How can we provide new home warranties with that particular product? The accessibility standards. So actually designing that in very, very early from the beginning means that actually we can create lifetime homes that people can move in as a starter home and live, if they wish, their entire lives there and adapt it to accessibility standards into the future. And then the incorporation of smart technologies. And it means that, it's interesting that home building itself seems to be quite old-fashioned in its approach. It really has very little sort of, the way in which technologies have been incorporated into homes is quite limited. But actually, treating the home as a product means that we can really start to think about what's the possibilities of technologies we can incorporate, whether that's things like leak detection or humidity detection in a home, to give us far more understanding of how you might operate a large-scale portfolio. This is just an image of the scheme that I was involved in with Top Hat. Again, it was 300 homes with a park setting, etc., with apartments as well. And again, in terms of consumer perception, there was no difference. In fact, the consumer felt that this was a far better quality product than that of a traditional built home. And this just gives you some imagery of how that sort of looks on a building site, and how they sort of go together, and how the different finishes, and this is the sort of internal sort of, and again, it can change in terms of what the target audience, what the consumer desires at the time. And so that's one aspect of the challenge that we're trying to solve. So it's how can you speed up the production of a home in a high quality, in that precision engineered way. So it gives us speed, it gives us traceability of components, which is really important, I think, to the future. It gives us the assurance that the underlying quality of the house itself is correct. And it also gives us continuous improvement, which is, again, in traditional construction, a really interesting sort of issue in that it seems the same mistakes happen again and again, and they seem to have to get resolved again and again on various different sites as you move to different projects. In a factory environment or precision engineering environment, once that mistake is identified, you resolve it, and it's never, you get better and better continuously in its approach. So that was one aspect of what I was involved in terms of factory-built homes. But then I felt, actually, this technology could be leveraged in a very different way. How might we start to look at this as the factories as just part of a supply chain to create really interesting new developments and places? And so this is just to give you an image of the UK and the people involved in really high-quality modern methods of construction there. So all over the UK, primarily, though, in the Midlands and the north of England. And the other dots there are our sites working with a land promoter. And so we started to think about how might we really help spark off this infant industry? How could we then start to buy capacity through those factories to help build our places? So essentially, Lattice now is a master developer of new communities, leveraging other people's facilities and manufacturing facilities to produce our developments. Essentially, aggregating the supply chain, delivering it on site, and offering homes with multiple forms of tenure, whether that's for sale, a product which I'll talk about in a second, rent to own, pure rent, shared ownership, or affordable housing. Because really the product differentiation doesn't change. From our perspective, the specification, the appearance of a home should be the same whether it's an affordable home or whether it's a private for sale home, because the communities that you build need that consistency. This is, I mean, essentially Lattice is, since my previous business, we've been going since 2019 on building a large-scale portfolio of sites. Working with a land promoter, we now have an initial pipeline of around 35,000 homes, which gives us an incredible ability. And actually, there hasn't been a new home builder in the UK for over 40 years, a sort of large-scale home builder. So we're really excited by the proposition of how the way in which we deliver homes changing and delivering it on our portfolio. So when we look at a place, this is a typical development that we're looking at in a place called Devon in England. And it's not just about the homes, it's about the schools, the medical facilities, the high streets, the parks that make that place work. And so we're looking about this particular project is a garden village, and the government there in the UK have a policy around creating new places, typically between 3,000 and 10,000 homes, with all the facilities included, so secondary schools, medical facilities, etc., and providing the key infrastructure at the same time, so highway junctions, railway stations reopening, etc., to make that place work. So it's really interesting to take the idea that you can deliver places at scale quickly, using this new industry that's been created in manufactured homes, to create whole new places quickly and fast. And we're taking those sort of placemaking principles in a modular format too. So how can we create garden squares in the UK, the vernacular of the homes, what do they look like, the beauty of the homes, because it's not really just about production and building as many homes on a particular site as possible. It's about what's the long-term sustainability of that place as a whole. And incorporating technologies early, so solar PV panels in microgrids, vehicle charging points, air source heat pumps to heat the homes in an all-electric solution, mobility issues, autonomous transport within these communities, fabric-first approach in terms of making sure the fabric of the building itself doesn't require huge amounts of heating or cooling to make it work, and then landscaping and the placemaking itself as a whole. But what's one advantage of a manufactured product is again, the understanding of how it's been assembled in a digital format. So all the factories that I talked about essentially use machinery that's driven by digital codes from a digital model. So you essentially can have a digital building information model of the house itself, which means You know that Joe fitted that door at that time, that batch number. You know exactly where that door came from. It means that then in the future, if you need to change or manage the portfolio, you know exactly what parts to take to the home before somebody even visits the property. It also gives a feedback into the system to allow the product to be continuously improved, which is a tremendous advantage over a normal built home. Just to give you an idea of how we look at projects in a sort of at a national level in the UK and how the planning system there works for us. This is a typical 134 home scheme, which is a real example of ours. And during the planning and zoning process of that project, typically 30 to 40% of the homes would be mandated as affordable homes as part of that project. And that's normally then split between affordable rent and a shared ownership product. And there are housing associations and institutions in the UK which essentially buy those finished homes for rent or for shared ownership. So in one way, it's a high level of affordable housing provided if you're looking at it from a traditional development perspective, but it also de-risks the development significantly from a development perspective, given that you know there's going to be a takeout of that affordable housing at a known price point. And then on top of that, you typically have something called CIL, which is Construction Infrastructure Levy, and something called Section 106 payments, which means that per house, there are contributions towards infrastructure, playgrounds, schools, open spaces, community facilities, etc. And in this instance, works out to approximately £20,000 per house built. So essentially, all of that is priced in when we acquire the land in the first place. And I think it was just an interesting example, understanding the dynamics here and how that potentially could influence or how you might look at it in a different way. One interesting innovation that we've looked at is one of the common arguments about not building more homes faster is the absorption rate of those homes from a typical development perspective. So a normal home builder would typically build at the rate at which they sell, and potentially build slightly lower than that rate to maintain the price point overall. Now, because we've changed the model so significantly, we wanted to make a way in which we could attach a financial product to the home, which meant that we could drive absorption rates to match the production rates in factories. Because that's a really interesting dynamic, because the factories, once they're going, can really produce homes 24 hours a day. And they can produce many more homes than a traditional home builder could probably sell. So typically, a developer would build at a rate which is a stable, the 1 to 2.5 homes a week in the UK. That's the rate at which you build out a site, which when you're building a whole new place is just too long. It takes too long to make that place work. So with using modern methods of construction, we can build homes much faster, but then we need to work out how can we increase the absorption rate of those homes and get people living in the places that we're building. And so this essentially was a model that we constructed around an infrastructure bond that meant that you could move into a home day one, essentially as a renter, but with every single rental payment, you accrue equity and you could end up owning the home after a period of time. And that gives also with a tremendous flexibility, because it means that you can set the rent payments you can afford to make at that specific time. And all it does is changes the length of time it takes to obtain the home. So as life circumstances change, as you might inherit some money, you might lose your job. So essentially, you need to be able to flex the payments that you can make. And all that really does is just change from it might work out that you can afford to pay an X amount of rent and you get the house in 30 years' time. It might mean that you can put some deposit money in year 10. So essentially, you reduce that time to 20 years, or you pay less and it takes it out to 50 or 60 years. It's a very, very dynamic, essentially internal mortgage system built around rent. And we think this is really very, very exciting, because it means that people that are renting, it's actually impossible to rent and save for a deposit at the same time. This gives people the ability to have equity in society by owning a home or being part of a home ownership without the traditional issues of deposits and conventional mortgages. And this is just some case studies of how that might look from a perspective, somebody with no deposit and can afford to pay a certain amount of rent, it will take them 40 years to obtain a home. And somebody that's got a small deposit can higher monthly payments, just a shorter amount of time. And so really that's where we're at in terms of our innovation. But Lattice is not about building factories to make homes in. It's about working with the supply chains in the UK and potentially here to develop their systems and processes to produce standardized house types, aggregated across several manufacturers that can build and create their facilities, working with best-in-class partners to enable those modules to be deployed on site, so using well-established major contractors to assemble and deliver those projects on the ground, and then, essentially with the ultimate aim of improving people's lives through the places in which they live and the homes in which they can obtain. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Luck. I'd like to welcome Councilmember Sitabaka is online, and Council Pro Tem Torres has joined us on the dais. Let's see, we've got a number of folks with questions. We'll start off with Councilmember Sawyer.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much. This was a really interesting presentation. Wondering about, it looks like a lot of the projects that you're doing in order to be able to make it financially work, they are, sorry, my microphone is like super weird. Do I sound weird to you?
That's fine.
Because I have like the weirdest, I don't know what's going on there. Okay. So it looks like they have to be big developments, right? Like numerous homes in order to take advantage of the economies of scale you would need to take advantage of in order to be able to make this work on a financial spreadsheet. So how would a product like this work in Denver, where we do not have very many large parcels left to be able to develop like this? And a lot of what we're looking at, particularly along our transit lines, are small parcels. They're not very deep. They're, they're maybe zoned for 3 stories. How would this work on a smaller scale, or would it work on a smaller scale?
That's a really good question. Essentially, by standardizing the product and the format of the homes that these factories produce, it means actually it might be that you're doing 10 or 15 smaller projects. Actually, those smaller projects then benefit from the standardized manufacturing cost point of those homes itself. So actually, it doesn't really matter. You don't need to build 1,000 homes in one place. You could do a development of 50 homes, but essentially using the same house types that you're using elsewhere, whether in Colorado or around the country. Actually, you're just essentially standardizing the manufacturing approach to that particular house type, and you can use it on any scale, any size project.
Okay.
But essentially, the one key aspect, though, is you do need a long-dated, large-scale pipeline to make factories really work. It's a bit like, it's thinking about it really like a car production. You need to have the volume to make, to really take advantage of the potential here, to really solve a large-scale housing problem.
Right. Okay.
And that's, it's just a different methodology. If you build one-off module, you can always get a factory to produce but very bespoke one-off type houses, but the price point will be very different. It's a different proposition.
Right. Okay. So do you have like a minimum acreage or square footage that works best for any of your footprints?
So, I mean, if we were looking at building projects here, we would first off design the product and we'd engineer the product for this specific audience. So the space standards that are expected here, the environmental standards that are expected, etc. So in the UK, we know one of our smallest developments is 45 homes. One of our biggest developments is 10,000 home new community. So actually, it shows you can work at various different scales, but essentially always using the same standardized house types. But I think that it would be first an exercise in looking at what the requirements were, both in terms of affordability. What does affordability really mean here, and what does that look like in terms of customer expectations, and building a product around that.
Okay. That's good to know, because, for example, our zoning code is extremely complicated, and which is funny because the form-based zoning code that we switched to in 2010 was supposed to make things simpler, but there's a lot of nuances to it, including, building envelopes and setbacks and max height requirements and all kinds of different things. So if a developer in Denver wanted to take advantage of, if you were to come to America and a developer in Denver were to want to take advantage of something like this, would you be able to offer a product, or would you that you already have that would fit, or would you have to really design for Denver's zoning code based on setbacks and things like that?
I think that we have the same challenges in the UK in terms of very complex planning rules and regulations and conservation areas and all sorts of issues that have to be dealt with in order to build a development. And actually, I think that can actually help make a really interesting new place when you have those complexities. But ultimately, those regulations are parametric. They're just distances between houses, the local vernacular, the heights, etc., like you mentioned. And that really does apply itself to manufacturing approach, because once you understand those parameters, and I can't believe they're that different to what we have to deal with also in the UK in terms of square footages, space standards, etc. Actually, it means that once you've established what those standards are and you've developed house types that you think will be attractive to the market, actually it means then anybody can take advantage of it. And that's the beauty of our approach. It's not really about manufacturing. We're not building factories. We're using other people's factories and other people's facilities, local facilities, to produce those parts. A product that's designed specifically for this audience, and then allowing other developers, other people to take advantage of that supply chain that we've created and that volume. So multiple developers using the same kind of house types. And it speeds the whole process up, which is ultimately what we're trying to achieve, is actually how can you speed up production of homes. And actually sometimes it really does take some thinking in terms of the planning system itself and and we're looking at ways in which we can help the government in the UK look at how might you adapt the planning system to take advantage of this new technology, this way in which you can build homes faster, better for more people. And that's interesting. So it could be things like type approvals. It's something that I'm a bit advocate for. Essentially, once you know and everybody's happy, the local government is happy, the building regulations are happy with the product itself, actually, why does it need to go through the system again and again and again for every new development that you create? As long as there's essentially a design code in place and that the product is known and this is what you're going to build, actually that can alleviate resources that could be used elsewhere in planning departments, etc. So it's just it's thinking about it as a modular construction methodology, but also how you might adapt planning policies in the future to take advantage of that new technology.
Interesting. And so what about things like customization, right? So if we're talking about a rent-to-own model for some future owners who are renters currently, and that's 40 years down the road. I mean, I'm 44 and I've lived in like 14 different houses in my life, right? So is it possible to get to provide this product in a way that makes sense for the way Americans live today, right? I mean, there's a lot, we're a big area, we change jobs a lot, we change cities frequently, so how does that, if you have a rent-to-own person living in one of your properties and they move, are they able to take that equity and put it towards something else, or how does that kind of work?
So in terms of the product itself, you can offer complete flexibility in terms of customization. Much like when you buy a new car, you can choose the colors, the specification, the internal finishes, etc. That is a possibility. Obviously, it does change the way, it changes the dynamic of how those factories need to be set up, how can they deal with those sort of one-off changes in the property, but it's completely doable. But I think the interesting point is that actually the financial model that we've created, essentially the financing model behind it, means that if you wish to move at any point in time, you can do and take that equity with you, so that in our model, essentially you can sell the property at market value and obtain the equity that you will have collected over, say, 10 years in that property and use it either for a conventional mortgage on a property, that may be your deposit on another kind of conventional, either conventional mortgage, or move to another rent-to-own property and just move the credits over. It's a very adaptable system that we're really excited by.
Interesting. Okay. I have like a zillion more questions, but I know there's a bunch of other people in the queue, so I will get in the back of the line. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Kinich.
Thank you so much. Welcome to Denver. And if I can ask you to please speak a little closer to the microphone. You feel really loud to yourself, but you're not very loud to those of us in the corners. Thank you. So I have a few questions based on local experience of affordable builders trying to use manufactured projects and the challenges they've run into. My suspicion is you've avoided some of them because of your model, but if I can just run through a few of those questions and how you deal with them. The first is that cost savings on production are lost in transportation costs. And so what is the furthest distance from a manufacturing facility to a site that makes sense financially? Okay. And are you, I'm assuming you had to solve that issue, but it sounds cheaper until you have to transport, and we have a large country, obviously, so our transportation costs could be greater than yours in the UK, but just curious about that.
It's a really good question, actually. I think, so I can only comment on my own examples in the UK and how that works, and the pricing dynamics there. But essentially, the facility that I helped build in Derbyshire, which is in the Midlands of England, and our development that I showed you, the big development, was in the south of England, so about 200 miles in terms of distance between our facility and the development site. And when you look at the cost of transport, you have to sort of weigh it up against the cost saving on site. So the cost of transporting a module in the UK is around £1,500 to £1,600 per module. So essentially, it's costing you on a two-module house around £3,000–4,000 to get that house to site and assembled. But what you don't need is scaffolding around the property. So actually, what you're saving in terms of what you're spending on transport, you're not spending on putting scaffolding around the property to put it together, because what you need is essentially a cherry picker to finish off the joints between the modules. So there's those kind of, and obviously then you have the time cost of money on site. So when you start to weigh in not only the manufacturing efficiency and potential cost savings, actually, when you look at the development from an entire picture, the cost overall of delivery of that project from a financial perspective, the IRR is much, much higher because it's much, much quicker to produce. So but that's right, transport, you do have to move either panels, if you're building a panelized home, or boxes to site, and it does have a cost implication. But from my own experience, we're looking at it from the entire picture, it gets outweighed by other things.
Got it. The second question is, so another challenge here is most of the manufactured producers are not themselves the builders. So they are selling to builders or developers, and significant challenges with the technical integration. We designed it to work this way, but when you get it on site, you have a construction manager who didn't build it. And so it sounds like you're integrated. You produce at the factory, you develop and install at the site. So you've maybe avoided that. Is your model exclusively you produce in your factory for your own development, or do you have customers who are not you? And if you do sell to customers who are not the developer, how do you provide the construction and integration expertise to ensure that all the knowledge is there for actually putting the product together and avoiding gaps? Because we are seeing those gaps really hurting projects in Colorado.
Yeah, I think so. We don't build factories. I no longer have a factory that builds homes like that, because what we're about is how can you leverage other people's facilities and other people's factories to produce a standardized product. And again, it's a bit like Apple producing an iPhone. There are factories all around the world that produce that product to a given specification. And so it's all about the design of the structure, the local design, the local building code. It's about the environmental specification, what the expectation is in that factory. Because actually you're having most of the construction work happening in those facilities. You're not really shipping panels, et cetera, to site, and then having all the on-site issues of raining and mud, people not turning up, and all of those issues. Because what we expect is a finished module to then get delivered to site and put together by a major main contractor. And we're looking at partnerships both here and in the UK that could essentially do that for us. So taking away the expectation of perhaps a small-scale facility that might only produce a couple of hundred homes a year to deliver on site, because that is a downfall of essentially, we want people to focus on their manufacturing systems and the way in which they build in the factory, taking away that expectation to deliver on site, because we will do that separately with a major contractor.
So I'm sorry, I don't totally understand. Can you explain to me? So do you provide the contractor, or you have contractors certified to do this, or how do you ensure that the contractor, as much as you're telling me it's all ready to go and it's really easy, that's not what's been happening on the ground here with these projects. There are integration issues, and the construction, a typical project has a developer and a construction firm. They may have worked together before, they may have not. The construction firm may have dealt with this product before, it may not have. Do you use an exclusive set of construction contractors who know your project inside and out, and that's a condition of doing these projects? It's not about, our culture is you go out and bid the project to 10 construction firms, and you might have any of those firms build your project.
So I see home building really as infrastructure. So we're working with various different infrastructure companies that tackle large-scale projects, but using that knowledge, using that expertise, and applying it to how can I put together essentially these boxes that are designed to a specification and delivered by a factory to site. And to be honest with you, the risk of in a fully volumetric solution, the risk of a module leaving a factory that isn't correct is very, very low. I think that if you're looking at modular systems which are panelized, or half modules, essentially half manufactured, half built on site, then you're opening up a whole world of potential issues with integration on site. But what I'm talking about is essentially finished product being delivered to site and applied onto standardized foundations and then put together in a very simple way. So actually, you're mitigating a lot of the risk by building, 80, 90% of the house in the factory itself, and using, say, major contractors that are used to large-scale infrastructure delivery. Because I was talking to Ian earlier about this, I see home building really is infrastructure. It shouldn't be seen as a one-off projects.
Okay, yeah, that's a big shift from how manufactured housing is happening here. Last question is about what is the densest project or product that you have been able to do, like what height or what number of units, what density are you able to achieve?
So, primarily I'm focused on single-family housing or 3 to 4 story apartment buildings. So it's not high-rise. We're not focused on high-end, large-scale buildings. It's all about making very nice, affordable, really single-family communities, and apartments are part of that. But I see there's quite a lot of people building apartment buildings. Actually, there's a big, I believe, a big demand for nicely designed, beautiful, single-family homes with back gardens that children can play in, all of those kinds of things. And I think that's where Lattice is focused.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Ortega, you're up.
I have a number of questions, but I'd like my colleagues to go first because we will have the opportunity for those that can stay to have a further conversation over lunch.
Great. Councilmember Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilwoman. Could you explain, excuse me, how scalable this methodology is to the more typical type of multifamily development we see in Denver, which might be mid-rise or even high-rise multifamily apartments, or I guess you call them flats, right? Because these are townhouses, and with land at a premium in Denver, we would want to take advantage of the opportunity for more density. So is this Have you looked at how scalable this might be to a 5 or an 8-story or even a 12-story structure?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that I say in the UK, my focus has primarily been on single-family housing, but the project that I showed you on the screen there has a 4-story apartment building with 200 apartments in it, and essentially it's about just designing those apartments in a modularized format. The factories would still produce them in exactly the same way. The only difference probably would be the application of the facade, the outside sort of cladding system on site rather than in the factory. And there are very high-rise buildings being built in the UK now using modular construction around a concrete core. It obviously speeds up the process dramatically. So there'd be no issue in terms of obviously designing the product to the specific design, the building code, whether that's light gauge steel or timber frame. I think the majority of buildings I've seen here are timber frame, and just applying that same methodology to mid-rise construction. I think the key thing though is to remember that this is about scale of production also. So it's not really about, it's about how could you use that same apartment type again and again on other developments, rather than designing bespoke apartments or bespoke angles or whatever on buildings specific to that one project, because this is all about scalability beyond a single project. So I'm to answer your question, yeah, that's absolutely doable.
Okay. Ian, I don't know if you might be able to address this better, operating more here in the U.S., but how, just to pile on a little bit on the earlier questioning, have you done an analysis, or has anybody done an analysis of this method as it relates to Denver's building codes and our various updates to have manufactured housing off-site, installed, basically put together on-site, as opposed to having construction all on-site, having inspectors show up, signing off on every step of the progress? How does that work with this sort of system?
Yeah, we did talk about it extensively. So Robert is fully aware now what he has to look at. The permitting process, approval process, the way they did in UK is slightly different. The idea of having a type approval, like you would do for a car or a train or anything we do in our business. Once you have a type approval done for a type of a house, then the inspections should be all focused in the factory instead of doing in the field. So we were discussing last night about how they did in UK. It is not exactly what I'm saying, but it could be done, that the inspections, because it is like a car, it is already built. If you still want to inspect every house that is being produced, then go to the factory where it is being done, because the assembly on site is only the 10% of the installation work and the integration. You can check the seals in the field, the rest of it, the electrical, the plumbing, all what you do in the field, that can be done at the factory level, and that saves a lot of time. So you can kind of chime in on what you're doing in the UK.
There would also have to be, I mean, you would have to have inspection at the point of manufacturing. You would also then have inspection on the site of installation. I'm trying to think through whether that would create more work for our office, which is already struggling to keep up, but I know that this isn't happening tomorrow.
Right.
So you would have to have two different locations.
The way I look at it, it's the way we build our trains here in the US, right? FRA regulates those. The planes are built the same way. Cars are built the same way. So if we have to think outside the box on this, how are those inspected? Well, first they're approved as type approval, meaning a type of train. The locomotive is type approved. After that, it is at the disposition of the FRA. Would they want to go and inspect each one of them when they're being produced, or they're going to just go with the certification process that the manufacturer is signing off under their quality control. You have seen that with the FAA, you see that with the FDA, you see that with the FRA. The new thing we are thinking in the housing business, if this is going to be done like that, then it should be also approached the same way. Of you inspect it in the factory, you type approve it, they have the quality procedures that they have to follow. You have the option to do audits on those instead of going for every house. And then when they are deployed on site, which is exactly what the federal FDA, FRA does, when the train is now ready to go to be running on the line, they will come out and do one more check of making sure it is good and safe. So the process of doing this is already existing here in the US. This is the way we do it. We inspect it in the factory, and then we check it one more time in the field. It doesn't mean that it needs a lot more staff. I think it's quite the contrary. You can explain the way you're doing it in the UK. I think it would reduce the workload on inspectors, or just because you're not doing that many inspections anymore. You're doing it just all in one place.
So just to sort of add to that slightly, the way for a new home in the UK, you also have to have a new home warranty, typically a 10 to 12-year new home insurance-backed warranty on the home itself. Otherwise, you aren't able to get a mortgage to buy it in the first place. So we actually have two systems happening in the sort of statutory approvals, the building code approval from the sort of local authority in the UK. And then on top of that, the insurance company that's going to provide that new home warranty is also checking the processes and procedures and the products in the factory as they're produced. So it's almost like a second layer of checking, ultimately.
One more area, totally different. Is there, in the model that you use in the UK, if it were to be brought over here, would there be access to this work by our skilled trades unions? In other words, the folks who are working inside, would they be the same skilled trades workers we have out on the site?
Yeah, I mean if you look at the factories that have been built in the UK, primarily they're using skilled plumbers, electricians, etc. And they're sort of augmenting that with apprentices, etc., in the factory to learn those processes. What we found when I was setting up that factory was the desire for multi-skills, and I think that will be the future. People will need more than just one trade, as it were, because in a factory environment, it's quite nice to move to something else and then move back on a shift basis, much like a car plant would do. But yeah, absolutely, I think that we use the same tradespeople in the factory. It's just systemized the way in which the panels come across, they're painted, the electrics go in, etc. It's just a different process, but the same people.
Thank you. I only had one other question, but I think I'll reserve that for later, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Okay, very fine. I think I have a few questions before I turn it over to you, Councilwoman. Robert, how many
Is your mic on?
Pardon me?
Is your mic on? It doesn't sound like it.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. How many units have you built thus far?
So Lattice itself, because it's a new business now, we've got a portfolio of 35,000 homes. We haven't built any yet. For my previous business, had a capacity of 2,000 homes per annum. And when I sold my stake in that business, we produced 300 homes using that methodology.
Okay, so Lattice hasn't built any yet, but you're preparing to build 35,000, did you say?
Our first homes will come out at the end of this year.
Great.
Using exactly the same methodology.
Sure. And so is this just simply residential? Have you done any commercial, retail?
It's purely focused on residential. So our approach has been to sort of get residential right and fix that problem first before we go into other aspects. But obviously, when we're designing a large-scale place, like some of the communities we've been designing, you have to design shops and medical facilities and other things, and schools and all those other things that go with it. But our primary focus is on residential only.
Sure. And in this form of construction, are you using what we would consider traditional construction materials, or are there
Yeah.
Certain materials that are unique to your style?
That was a very key factor for me when I was looking at the different systems at the time when we were setting up that facility, looking at the different methodologies and materials that were out there, and very interesting materials. But I wanted it to have a conventional new home warranty when that house was built and finished on site, and I think that's been the best approach. So it's timber, it's roof tiles, it's all conventional materials that build it. So and typically there are two systems. There's light gauge steel and there's timber frame for this kind of production.
Right. So I mean, are the walls drywall, plastered?
Drywall, plastered.
Really? Okay, great. Let me see what else I had. You said something, and with your New Jersey accent is giving me a little trouble. These 30 to 40% of your units affordable?
So typically in the UK, when we buy a site, we appraise that site on the knowledge that the starting point for local authority giving us permission will be 40% affordable housing on that project site. So before we've even purchased the land, we know that we can account for that cost of 40. I mean, I have a site that one of our other sites is 50% affordable housing on the project, primarily because that's what the requirement was at that time, for that local authority, and the smallest amount of affordable housing we've ever done is 25%.
Yeah, I'd be interested in talking to you more about that. Can you explain maybe a little bit about what your definition of affordability is?
Yeah, so I mean, when you build a scheme of say 100 homes and 40% of them are going to be affordable housing, you have to sell those houses to affordable housing provider, which has its own criteria on what affordability means to them. And typically they're local housing bodies that either do shared ownership, so it means that you can buy a portion of the house and they buy the rest, and you pay a rent on the small portion that you've not bought, or there are sort of social rent, which means discounted, say, 60% of market rent going to the market. And then there are affordable housing providers which are specifically focused on key workers, providing houses for teachers and nurses, etc.
Great, thank you very much. Those are my questions. Councilmember Ortega.
Do we have any of our colleagues online virtually with any questions? Okay.
Not that I noticed, no.
Okay. I'm first going to ask a couple of questions. We are being joined by our director of the Denver Urban Renewal Authority that works with many of our large projects being done around our city. And so the first question is, can this be done with accessory dwelling units? So we're across the city, we've seen more and more of these where there's land in the back of a home that an additional unit is being built. I don't know if you refer to that technology, that type of housing in the UK the same as we do, but the question is, can this be done as a single-family home that could be put on a lot behind a property?
I mean, it could work like that. I mean, essentially, you could choose from a catalogue of house types that could be deployed on a single basis. I'm unsure, we've never done it before, but I'm unsure what the price point would be of actually delivering that single home. But there'd be no reason why there couldn't be a range of product design specifically for increasing the density on existing urban settlements.
So single-family home owners who would want to do this could potentially work with the builder of these manufactured homes to order one and then have it assembled. Obviously, the foundation, everything would have to be done on site, but that could be another market other than developers looking at single sites where they might do more multifamily units.
Conceptually, it's absolutely doable, and actually, it's for the factories producing homes. It's all about volume. So the more volume that can be created, the lower the price point of that home into the future. So if that was a big enough market to actually deploy those homes on a single home basis, then it would be conceptually doable.
So the other question I want to ask is about the transportation and how that's done, and if there are any load limits I see that a number of the projects that you showed have brick exterior. Are there load limits, and how is that transportation done?
So in the UK, we have there's very strict rules on how the size of module that you can transport.
Yeah.
And typically, it's 5.6 meters wide, 3.3 meters high, and up to 18 meters long. So big enough to build, 4-bedroom home using modules, no problem. The bricks that you saw on the project that the top hat product that I showed you there, they're brick slips. So essentially, they're
Like
very
veneers?
thin bricks that are applied in the factory and then grouted. So actually, the weight isn't an issue. There were no load issues, as it were,
Okay.
because you're essentially dealing with quite a lightweight frame. It's a timber frame or a steel frame in a box. So no more heavy than a container filled with product, probably.
Let me go through this list. There are a few others. So you've already identified this could be both multifamily as well as single family. You talked about the height. Can any of this be transferred to rehabilitation of an existing structure, or is it just isolated to new builds?
So obviously, what I've talked about today is fully volumetric housing, which is ideal for new build developments. But if you start to look at other very interesting modular companies out there building pods that can be used, and essentially a hybrid modular approach where you can slot in bathrooms and kitchens into existing structures, you can absolutely recycle existing buildings and use modular construction to do that. That isn't what I'm focused on, but there are other people that are. It's absolutely something that is, I think that the recycling of a building is really very interesting. And I think that into the future, one of the advantages of homes built in modules is that you could potentially take them apart again and refurbish them and reassemble the module itself.
So on a given day, how many can be built in the factory, and what is the size of the factory?
Okay, so from my own experience, the factory was designed to build a home within a 3-bedroom home at a takt time of around 48 process hours, but a 3-bedroom home every 6 hours popping off the line. So the key thing is to fill the production line with homes being built. So once that's full, actually you can build at a very, very quick rate, hours, not weeks or months. And so then it's about how quickly do you want to deploy on site, because once those modules are manufactured, they can be stored and you can deploy them really as quickly as you want to go on a site. So that's the you could build no problem a house a day or 2 houses a day or a whole row of houses a day if you wanted to on a particular site, given that all of the work has been done in a
So you
manufacturing.
don't want to be storing them on site because you're not going to have room to be storing them on site of the warehouse, right? Okay. So we talked a little bit about the scale of production. The question is about the scale of production to support local and regional demand, if you will. And if there were to be a facility in Denver, you talked about the 200-mile distance. All up and down our Front Range, there's such a demand for not just housing, but affordable housing. And it sounds like this could be an incredible opportunity to bring online that affordability. So have you looked at any of the data in Colorado around what that need and demand is and how such a facility could do that? Or would you see a need to work with potentially some of the other production? I think we have 2 production facilities in Colorado.
Absolutely. I think that the key here is not for Lattice to build a factory in Denver, but to use existing supply chains and existing companies with their established workforce to produce the modules. And actually, the interesting thing is my evolution from panelized housing into fully volumetric only was actually quite in many ways, a small shift. What you're really doing is taking those panels and just assembling them in a sort of factory environment. So I believe that there are probably far more panelized manufacturers here in Colorado that could potentially be used to produce a fully volumetric home. And actually, the more people that can actually be used in that supply chain, the better, because you take essentially the banking risk out of a single manufacturer having issues with supply chains or delivery issues. It means that with a standardized product, you can shift manufacture to another manufacturer, or have 2 or 3 facilities producing the same modules for a specific development.
So some of the existing manufacturers may have their own intellectual properties around their technology. And if you're wanting to utilize some of those existing manufacturers, how would your intellectual property transfer? Can you talk a little bit about that?
That would be an individual conversation with them, and in terms of what the advantage of their IP was, in terms of system, maybe their factory has been set up just to build homes in that way. But to me, it's not really, the manufacturing of a home is really just part of the whole process. My main vision is to bring more homes, better homes, into more people's lives. It's not really about worrying about somebody's IP and how they make a joint work in a factory. It's about the quality of the actual product itself. So what's the environmental specification, the space, the design of that home? To me, that's the key element, not necessarily about very specific IP issues around materials or joints or bonding ways, etc.
So if we wanted to build an additional warehouse because potentially the existing manufacturers might not want to look at your specific technology, what would that cost, and what would the actual size of that footprint be to do such a facility?
So it would depend on how much automation was required, what the output for that factory would be. So that starting at the output, if you wanted to produce, 2,000, 3,000 homes per annum, probably talking a 180,000 square foot facility, an automated facility. If there wasn't a desire to automate, the facility would just be bigger, because essentially what you would do is have essentially traditional workstations in the factory where people would assemble manually the product, but essentially still following the same procedures. It's just a slower way of doing it. So I would say, off the top of my head, if you wanted to build a facility to do 2,000 homes a year, around 180,000 square feet.
Okay, that's great to know. Did you have another question?
Do you mind if I shift to Councilmember Sudabaka for a minute?
No, absolutely.
Councilwoman, you're online.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank Lattice Group for being here and telling us about their model. This is an amazing model that has been really successful for us in GES. The GES Land Trust has actually been experimenting with prefabricated units. We've got 4 duplex units, and we have several sitting in an AT&T parking lot waiting to be installed. We've found that most of our challenges are coming with our permitting process and our zoning process. And so this is definitely a model that can produce really fast and could get our people who need homes into homes virtually like overnight if we wanted to. But until we address those challenges with permitting and zoning, you'll have units like ours sitting in a lot for months on end. And then adding the cost of, having to replace the stuff inside they've been broken into, things have been stolen. And so I really think this is a model that Denver should explore, not only for our regular housing, but for ADUs. But also, I think we need to specifically carve out processes within our own zoning code and within our own zoning department to make sure that these get expedited so that they fulfill their intended purpose. But just really wanted to put that out there and invite colleagues to come and see them installed. I've watched all of ours be installed in GES, And Lattice Group is exactly right. It can happen in hours, and it's fascinating to see it done, even with 2-level units or multi-level units. So invite all of you guys to come and check out ours once we finally make it through the zoning and permitting process for our next 5 units. That's it for my comments. Thank you.
We'll take you up on that offer. Back to you,
So
Councilman.
to that point, one of the documents that I shared with you that Ian had passed on to me is the local development orders that I believe were created. I'm not sure if it was in just one particular part of the UK or if this has been sort of adopted across the board, that has looked at how to address and try to streamline part of that permitting process. So can you speak to that? And you all should have that document that was forwarded to you. I think I sent it last night.
Yeah, it's very interesting because we have exactly the same issues in terms of the length of time it takes to obtain planning permission to build these developments out. And there needs to be a radical shift, and that's starting to happen now in the UK, on how we think about planning of zoning approvals for manufactured housing, because it's a big balancing act. On the one hand, you can produce many thousands of homes. I believe you can marry that with the correct absorption rates, so with the right kind of model for affordable housing and the financial model to enable people to move into that house. I think that can happen. I think we've innovated a way in which to do that. But the zoning side has to catch up. There needs to be a way in which you can approve large-scale new places or large-scale developments very, very rapidly. And we've explored all sorts of different ways within the existing planning system in the UK, and the government in the UK is looking. There was a planning white paper looking at ways in which the process could be improved and sped up. And one of the mechanisms that I found particularly interesting actually wasn't. It isn't a new planning system. It's been rarely used in the UK. It's something called a local development order, and essentially what that is, it's the local authority, the local government has a desire to build houses or a new place, and they want to get on with it and cut a lot of the bureaucracy of how you go about getting started on site. And it's a two-way street. On the one hand, they say, well, if we just give free rein to a developer to do anything they want on the site, you may not necessarily get what you desire for the long term in that place in terms of placemaking, etc. So a local development order often goes hand in hand with a design code and essentially standardized house types or standardized designs, which that's the debate to have, is actually what should the garden sizes be, what's the distance between houses, how many stalls should you have, all of that. You set out those parameters, and essentially a red line is drawn around the site parameter, and within that boundary, you have something called permitted development rights to get on and build out that development in a very accelerated way. It's been used a couple of times in the UK. It's still very rare. And I think actually the examples that I've provided, Nans Leddon in Cornwall, which was a development by the Prince of Wales, and a beautiful development that has been built using exactly that methodology. And I think that one of the case studies is that development, well worth seeing. And that shows where you can create really high quality placemaking in an accelerated way.
So I did share the document that covers the LDOs with our planning director, and hopefully that will jumpstart a conversation between City Council and our planning office around how we can work to expedite this type of housing, because if we're saving cost on the construction and placement side, then we should be able to figure out how to address this issue from the whole permitting and zoning, the land use side of it.
To really make it work at scale fast. That's
Yeah.
absolutely what needs to happen.
Right, right. Because we know in the construction industry, time is money, right?
That's right.
And if we can condense the time frame to get housing production, and particularly for affordable housing, then we can really make a dent in addressing part of our affordable housing challenges for our, not just our city, but our metropolitan area. I have some other questions, but I'll wait and save those for when we talk during lunch.
Okay, well, we've got 10 minutes left. Is there anyone else online? Seeing no one online?
Yes.
No one here on the dais? I will thank you again for your presentation. Thank you for making the trip. Glad to have you here.
Thank you,
and we'll look forward to talking more over lunch. With that, I believe the work for this committee is done, and we shall adjourn.
Great. Thank you.